It's not quite Friday 9th of February yet in America, but it's close. And it's 5 p.m. on Friday 9th of February where I live, which is near Australia's national capital, Canberra. I don't live in the ACT, but I live nearby. And in 28 days it will be Friday 9th of March 2018. And that's one of the dates. In fact, it's the big date on my list of dates. Dates to watch for signs that will be part of the prophecy of Jacob Wetterling and Nathan Breeze, which is intended to be a message against authoritarianism. Authoritarianism. Yes, it's true. I recently saw a Christian, evangelical Christian pastor on the TV saying that the enemies of Donald Trump are like snakes. He called them snakes, the enemies of Donald Trump. So me, Jake, and Nathan decided we will be snakes. Count us in as snakes. Because we'll be enemies of Donald Trump. We want to be enemies of Donald Trump. We don't like Donald Trump. We think Donald Trump's an A-class idiot. Worse than an idiot, we think he's evil, actually. Traditionally, Satan is considered evil by Christians. Satan is like the evil one, the one you must reject and be afraid of and be scared of. Be scared of the devil, reject Satan. Stay away from Satan. Satan's evil. The snake, the tempter, the bad one. Really? Because all I'm seeing is Christians denigrating refugees, running them into the ground, and being really cruel. And then they claim to have better moral values than everyone else. Amusing, isn't it? Very amusing. So amusing, not that me, Jake, and Nathan have decided to be snake boys. So, the prophecy is a prophecy against authoritarian idiots. I.e., people like Donald Trump. People like Peter Dutton is Australia's Donald Trump. Head of Home Affairs, Head of Immigration and Border Protection. Another person who likes to denigrate refugees, run them into the ground, label them all as criminals, label them all as gang members, label them all as this, that, and the other. It's called stigmatizing people by their race, by their skin color, by where they came from, by where they were born. It's called racism. It's not cool. Jake and Nathan both say, not cool, not on. This prophecy is their prophecy. It's a message against authoritarianism. And today is Friday 9th of February. Nearly said March. You nearly fooled me. But no, it's not March until 28 days from now. It will be Friday 9th of March 2018. And that's the main date of the prophecy, because that's the birthday of my boyfriend, or the guy who would have been my boyfriend if Peter Dutton's Department of Immigration and Border Protection had simply done their jobs and not being racists and just processed our partner visa fairly, but they did not. So, yes, Jake and Nathan are helping me out with a prophecy against Australia's Department of Immigration and Border Protection and Peter Dutton. So, there you go. And America, you should consider yourself lucky. In Australia, it's even worse. We've got Labor and Liberal, Labor and the Coalition. Honestly, there's no difference. There's no difference between the two. They both just want to win the next election, and that's all they care about. And it's got to the point where I've decided, come the next election, you have to vote in Australia. It's not like America. In Australia, you have to go vote, or they'll fine you. Australia's not a very free country in lots of ways. And in Australia, they will fine you if you don't vote. So next federal election, I'm going to get my name marked off. I'm going to get my ballot paper. I'm going to leave it blank. I'm going to put it in the thing. Because I'm not voting Liberal. I'm not voting Labor. I'm not going to be forced to vote for one bunch of idiots or another bunch of idiots. And they are both bunches of idiots these days. And all they want is power. They just want to get into power. And they will do and say anything to get into power. And it was really evident at the last election. Because at the last election, Labor, who I was inclined to vote for Labor at the last election, except all I could see when I got to the election booth was Mediscare campaign. And I'm like, really, is this the best you can do? I thought you were meant to be the alternative government. Nah, it's just too much. It's like, no more. And Australia is becoming like a police state. It's becoming very authoritarian. I'm not a fan of the place anymore. I am an Aussie, but I'm not very proud of the place. I'm not proud of the conversations that I had in Australia about Aboriginals. The same-sex marriage thing, that went a good way, but it was no thanks to the politicians. They strung it out for years. And the only reason that was resolved in the end was because Peter Dutton's plan to do a postal survey, which he thought would return a no vote, backfired, blew up in his face like a party popper at a gay wedding, and most Australians, about 60%, said yes. Let's allow gay people to get married, which I think is great. And no thanks to the politicians, it was thanks to the people. Don't forget that. The Australian people do actually have a little bit of sense. Politicians, none whatsoever. And the proof is in, I think the real proof is in the Australia's response to what has happened in Myanmar, which is in our part of the world. Myanmar, it used to be called Burma. It's next to Bangladesh. It's a majority Buddhist country. The military there recently slaughtered several thousand people. Brutal. They threw little kids into fires and let them burn to death. And I mean like 1-year-old and 2-year-old and 6-month-old baby boys burned to death in fires. Australia's government didn't even bother to condemn what was done by the Myanmar military. Still has a working relationship with them actually, and has not condemned their actions. Why? Because the victims were Muslims. The Rohingya Muslims were the victims of textbook ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing is how the UN described it, and it's also how Amnesty International described it. Of course, all the right-wing idiots in Australia refer to the UN and Amnesty International as lefties. They don't seem to get it, that human rights are actually important, and sticking up for things like brutality, standing against brutality, standing against torture and murder, especially when it involves throwing little kids into fires, is pretty important. Otherwise, why did my grandfather go to war? Why did any soldier ever fight in history if the great Western nations of the world are becoming just like Hitler in terms of being racist and in terms of spreading propaganda, blaming little defenseless, helpless minorities for the problems of the world? It's disgusting. And this is a message against authoritarianism. It's a message against quite a bit more than that too. It's a message against religious hypocrisy and political crap. So here's a story from today, Friday 9th of March 2018, although it's not quite there yet in America. Will be soon. Countdown's on to another government shutdown. I wonder why.
Ticking down closer to the latest government shutdown. The impasse on the Senate floor appears to be placing that announced bipartisan deal by Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer, putting that on hold. I want to bring in now Oregon Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley. Senator, it's a pleasure to have you on. So the last time we spoke was January 19th, right before the last shutdown. So here we are. Why is this happening again, Senator?
I tell you, last time we spoke, we were pushing for a 3-day continuing resolution. The Democrats were to keep the government open and keep people negotiating intensely. And I predicted then that the negotiations wouldn't really get serious until the last couple days of a continuing resolution. And that's exactly what's happened. So here we are at the last minute, a big bill coming out just a few hours ago, people trying to go through it and understand what's in it. And of course, this last moment speech and protest by Rand Paul to make a very important point, I might add.
Yeah. So, Senator, how are you going to explain this to your constituents back home?
Well, back home in Oregon, there's a couple things that people really care about that are not part of this bill. One of the key things is that despite the massive aid to Texas and Puerto Rico and Florida and Virgin Islands, there's nothing that addresses the massive fires that went through the Northwest last summer and to prepare to stop those fires this coming summer. So that's a big deal. That's been left out of this bill. And second, a lot of concern that our community members, our dreamers, who have been treated so poorly by this administration, are going to be left in limbo for an additional period. And those things matter. Meanwhile, I'm going to say that there's a whole bunch of things in this bill that I fought for that are really important as well. For example, keeping the health clinics open, and proceeding to address the opioid epidemic. So those are some good things. It's got some very good things in it.
Okay. So tonight, Senator Rand Paul called out his fellow Republicans for hypocrisy in their budget plan after the GOP criticized President Barack Obama for adding to the U.S. deficit during his time in office. Is he right?
He's absolutely right. We can go back to when the Republican team was saying, let's spend the government until it's so small, it's broke, it won't be able to spend anything more. And then the Democrats come into office and they say, oh, we're sorry, there's no way you can address national problems. We're going to block anything you do to try to take on health care, to try to take on education, to try to take on infrastructure. And then when they're back in office, they start spending like drunken sailors. This bill represents an increase of about $150 billion a year, or another $1.5 trillion over 10 years, and you add that what they did on taxes, that's another $3 trillion manufactured out of nowhere.
Yeah. So listen, Paul also said that, he said the American people are going to be upset that conservatives were elected, are not much different than the people that they're criticizing. Is this an example of campaigning is different than governing, you think?
Well, I've always believed in the principle, you campaign on the things you believe in, and then you fight for the things you campaigned on. That does not seem to be the vision of the Republican Party.
Immigration. It's not even part of this deal. Everyone thought that, well, since DACA was taking it out, that this wouldn't happen. So where does this all go from here?
Everything depends upon President Trump. President Trump, when he wants to say, I'm the deal maker, as he did a couple weeks ago when he brought in the House and the Senate and the Republicans and Democrats and said, you all work out a deal, bring it to me, I'll sign whatever you have, I'll take the heat. That individual has disappeared. Instead, we have the president who wants to refer to all immigrants as if they're all gang members. And that sounds like someone who's turned to Breitbart and decided to drive a campaign issue right into November by degrading the enormous contribution immigrants are making to our country. And if that's the mode he's in, there's not going to be a deal successful over restoring legal status for the Dreamers.
I just want to ask you a little bit more about that. Why do you say it depends on him? Because I had Mazie Hirono on earlier, and she said the less this president is involved in this process, the more of an opportunity it has to be better and to come to some sort of agreement.
It does show the craziness of the situation, but here's why I'm describing it this way. When we passed an immigration deal in 2013, we had members of the Republican caucus and the Democratic caucus come together, work out a deal. They had a stake in it. They were determined to do it. And they had a president who supported it. But to get those 60 votes, you have to have cooperation of the Republican leadership. Otherwise, Rand Paul calls up Mitch McConnell, or the president calls up Mitch McConnell and says, I'm okay with 55, 56 votes, but don't let there be 60 because I want this issue as a campaign issue. I want to keep denigrating immigrants. I want to keep portraying them as gang members. I think that's our best bet, and so I don't want a deal. And if that happens, there won't be 60 votes in the Senate.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Good to be with you, Don.
You as well. When we come back, under an hour until the government shuts down, who's to blame? And Omarosa. Omarosa? How do you say it? Omarosa? Omarosa?